Well, I want to welcome everybody. Thank you very much for taking your hour away with me and with our tax advisor tonight. My prayer this morning, I have some of you, most of you probably don't know, but I've got a little journal. I have my little quiet time with God in the morning, and my prayer this morning was that this hour was going to be beneficial for you. Wanted to make sure that if you were going to commit an hour to the content that I was going to provide, that you were going to walk away and say that was a valuable hour. So may that in fact be the case. If we reflect back, think back only just a few short months to November of 2020. And when we think of that, we think of the election results. Did he win? Didn't he win? We think about the Georgia runoffs. We think about all the COVID-19 surge. We think of all the things that were dominating our news cycle in November. And interestingly enough, the one thing that most affects all of us is Proposition 19. And it just didn't make a whole lot of the news cycle, but it does make a big impact on any of us that are over 55 years old. It definitely affects us. So I thought I would just take an hour tonight to go over some of the new laws that are affiliated with Proposition 19, how they affect your property taxes, and how they affect your choices in moving forward with your housing. So, and along with that, we also wanted to cover some of the issues that are relevant to capital gains because people's houses have gone up in value so much. So tonight I'll go ahead. I'm going to be presenting on Proposition 19. I want to introduce my assistant, Emily Gibson. Emily is going to be Emily's my right arm, my left arm. She's like my whole thing. Emily is my world. And she is going to be handling some of the technical aspects of things tonight so that I can just concentrate on being on this call with you. And then I also want to introduce Chris Basom. Chris, can you like wave to the group?
Hey.
All right, great. Chris is a tax accountant. He has been in the business since 1982, 39 years preparing taxes, 20,000 tax returns during that time. And he really considers himself a practical tax expert, which I love because I'm such a practical girl. And he just loves finding deductions that are legal. He just loves telling the deduction story when preparing taxes. So I think we're in for a real treat in terms of some tax preparation tips, especially affiliated with capital gains this evening. So I wanted to go ahead and start out by concentrating just on three things this evening. So Emily, maybe if you could just put up that first slide so we can kind of set the tone for what we're going to be covering this evening. I'll let you screen share that.
Go up to
other slide. There we go. All righty. So these are the three things that we're going to be covering this evening. I will be covering question number 1, and that becomes, how can I sell my current home, move anywhere in California, and take my current low tax base with me? I will also be dealing with question number 2. How can I sell my current home, buy a more expensive home in California, and take my current tax base with me? And then I'll be turning the evening over to Chris Basom. Chris will be sharing about how you can sell your current home with years of appreciation and pay little or no capital gains. So that is our content tonight, and in the hopes that we can cover those 3 questions. And what I wanted, if we could just go ahead and take that screen down for a moment. What I wanted to share with you is what happened with what the purpose was for Proposition 19. In many ways, it's going to open up more housing inventory. Prior to Proposition 19, if you were over 55, that was your only criteria, you could sell your principal place of residence, the home that you have lived in 2 out of the last 5 years, one time, and you could buy a home of equal or lesser value one time and keep your old property tax base with you if you purchased again in Orange County or purchased again in one of about 4 or 5 or 6 counties at any given year that felt like cooperating with Orange County. What Proposition 19 said is that now if you are over 55, you are also lumped in with two other categories of people, and that is categories, the people who are permanently disabled and people that have been affected by the wildfires. So I'm kind of assuming tonight that we've got two categories, because I'm looking at everybody on the screen and I don't think any of you got displaced by the wildfires. But I think these two categories, and most of all, really, this is for people that are over 55. We're going to see where you're able to purchase and not have to pay the higher property tax when you make a move. So let's see if we can take an example. Emily, maybe you could put up that first picture on the screen with the map of California.
There we go.
There we go. All righty. So if you, obviously we can see where Orange County is. I did not know until this whole COVID thing where we're watching California politics morning, noon, and night, but there are 58 counties in California. And with Proposition 19, you can move from Orange County to any of the 58 counties, and you can take your old property taxes with you. And you can do this if you are either over 55 or you're disabled. So let's take kind of an example of what life looks like here in South Orange County for give or take $100,000 or $200,000 for people that are watching this as we speak. Let's say your current home value is currently $900,000. And let's say you bought your house 20 years ago and you paid $400,000. Most likely your current property taxes are running right around $5,000 per year. That's because they're 1% of your purchase price. That's your $400,000, 1% being $4,000 per year. And then your property taxes can go up 2% every year. So if you've owned it for 20 years, you're probably paying $4,700, $4,800, $4,900 a year. Now you can buy anywhere in any one of those 58 counties in California. You can buy up and down the state. You can do this up to 3 times, and you can buy a home of equal value or lesser value and take your old tax base with you. So again, with that example, let's say you sell your house for $900,000 and you go ahead and buy a house. You move to El Dorado or Sacramento area or San Diego, and you buy for $900,000, then you keep your same $5,000 tax base. Let's say, for instance, you want to downsize a little bit, not have such an expensive home or such a large home, or maybe you're going to downsize to something a little bit easier to maintain, and you buy something for $700,000. Again, your tax base would be the $5,000 tax base that you would be taking with you for property taxes. You can do this up to 3 times. It used to be you could only do this once. So for those that are looking to buy of equal or lesser value, the big change here is that you can do it you can move up to 3 times in your lifetime, as long as the place has been your principal place of residence 2 out of the last 5 years. And you can move to any county outside Orange County or any county in California. So that is really pretty much the number one big change that took place with Proposition 19. And then if we could move over to the final slide, the second big change that happened with Proposition 19 is that you can take your old tax base with you and you can buy something bigger and better. So I have had clients of mine for years that have said, you know what, I've got this 2-story house. It's worth, let's just say, $900,000. I'm sick of the stairs. I'd really love to move out to Rancho Mission Viejo. They've got these beautiful 1-story homes, 2,200 square feet. They're kind of like $1.1 million, $1.2 million, but gosh, we can afford that. But I don't want to lose my old tax base. And I've had to say, yeah, I'm really sorry, you will lose your old tax base. But with Proposition 19, you can buy up and you only pay the tax, you take your rollover on your property taxes that are current, and then you only pay for the delta on the purchase price differential. So let's take this example. You sell your house for $900,000 and your yearly property taxes are $5,000, since that's my example I'm using this evening. I keep driving it home. And you decide to buy a home for $1.2 million.
Yeah.
And then you can roll over your $5,000, and then you pay 1% of the purchase price on the delta. Your delta is $300,000. The difference between $900,000 and $1.2 million is $300,000. 1% of that purchase price is $3,000. So the 5,000 and the 3,000 makes your tax bill you pay every year to the government 8,000. If this was last year and you decided to do exactly the same thing, your property taxes would be $12,000. They would be 1% of your new purchase price. And a lot of people didn't want to do that, so they didn't move. And you can do this 3 times. So let's say, for instance, you sell this $900,000 house I keep talking about, and you decide to follow your grandkids because your son-in-law got a job up at Silicon Valley, and you decide to follow your grandkids and move up to San Jose area and get a 2-bedroom loft. You can do that. And then let's just say, you don't like your son-in-law as much as you thought you did after 4 or 5 years. You can go ahead and move again, and you can move down and get a cottage on the beach for $1.2 million. You have flexibility that you never had before. So really, with Proposition 19, it gives you flexibility moving up and down the state of California. It gives you flexibility 3 times to be able to take your old tax base with you. And it doesn't make it cost prohibitive to buy something that is a little bit more expensive. And, for most of us, changing homes, it's not that much of a differential. Maybe you're going to sell for $900 and buy for $995. I mean, just enough to get exactly what it is that you are looking for. But you would have been so penalized, people couldn't move. And actually, it was California Association of Realtors. None of us like lobbyists, unless, of course, they're lobbying for you. Then lobbyists are all okay. But we lobbied as a group for some of these aspects of Proposition 19 to go into place, just because it opens up more inventory. So I hope this explains a little bit more for you in regards to Proposition 19. And we're going to go on next. I'm going to go ahead and turn our time over to Chris Basom. And he's going to be talking with us about what happens with capital gains, because here's the situation that so many of us are in. If you've owned your home for a long time, you've made a lot of money on it, the equity's gone up, and then the question becomes, how much of that do I have to give the government? So I think I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Chris at this time. And maybe, Chris, you can share a little bit about some of the aspects, some of the inheritance, the estate planning aspects of Proposition 19, and also about how to make some capital gains savings. So can I turn that over to you?
Absolutely, you bet. So let's jump over here and we'll share that screen. So we're going to talk about the tax impact of selling your home. And most of us know this as capital gains taxes. So let's just start at the very beginning and let's define what we're going to talk about. Capital gains tax are created by selling a capital asset at a profit. All right. And your home is a capital asset. Stocks and bonds are capital assets. That great collector car you've got in the garage is a capital asset. All those things are capital assets. If we buy it for $1, sell it for $2, we've got a capital gain, and we're going to pay capital gains taxes on that. The way capital gains taxes work, and we're probably all familiar with this too, so I apologize for remedial education if I'm doing that to you, but the holding period of the asset, how long you held it for, determines the tax rate that you're going to pay. Short-term taxes or capital gains taxes will be paid on anything you held for less than a year, and those are not the best taxes. Those are ordinary income rates. So whatever you're going to pay on the rest of your income, you're going to pay that same rate on short-term capital gains. What we want are long-term capital gains. Long-term capital gains is that preferential rate that starts at 15%, and we pay that on the sale of assets that we've held for more than a year. Now, because you've got to pack and unpack and escrow and all that stuff, most of us live in a house for at least a year. So we're going to assume that that's your home. So with that, how do we calculate capital gains? I'm going to take you through a little bit of math. I promise I'll go fast, but the math works like this. We take our sales price, less our selling expenses, title, escrow, commissions, that kind of stuff, less our original purchase price, less our improvements. That's the new roof, the new flooring, the new window coverings, the paint, all those things we did to the house while we lived there, less other basis adjustments or exclusions. So we're going to hit on that in a second. And that equals our gain or our loss. Okay, so our purchase or our sales price less all of those things results in our gain or loss. Let's look at a real example. Let's say we have an $800,000 sales price and we had $60,000 in sales expenses, and we had purchased the property for 100 to begin with. We'd put 50 into it during the time that we owned it, and we took the one-time $250 Section 121 exclusion for a single person on this particular property. That means we ended up with a profit of $340,000. That results in a combined state and federal income tax of 85 grand. So that's what happened with that one property. Now, there was an important exclusion we listed in there, and that was the 121 exclusion. Karen talked about the way Prop 19 used to be. I think it was Prop 57, wasn't it, Karen? Something like that.
It was Prop 60.
Prop 60. Okay. And that was the one that limited us to the 5 or 7 counties that it worked in that were reciprocal taxes to Orange County. That was the once, you can only do it once, all that stuff. And that's what Prop 19 really opened up for us. Well, the Section 121 exclusion is the latest version of what happens when you sell your house. Some of us will remember a long time ago that if we sold a house, we could roll the gain, whatever profit we made, into our new house as long as we bought within 2 years. That law went away. I'm going to surprise you now. That law went away in 1987. We haven't had that law for a long time. And the new law, the law that's been around for a while, is this Section 121 exclusion. There are 2 conditions to qualify. And Karen has stated one of them a couple of times. You have to live in the property for 2 of the last 5 as your primary residence, and you have to own the property for 2 of the last 5 as your primary residence. If you accomplish both those things and you sell that house and you have a capital gain, you can exclude, if you're filing jointly, if you're married and filing jointly, you can exclude $500,000 of profit from any taxation, no taxes at all on a $500,000 worth of gain. If you're a single person, you can exclude $250,000 of gain on that property. Now, when Karen and I talk about property, we don't talk about Arkansas a lot, but when we do, we many times mention that you'd have to really have an incredible property to sell it in Arkansas for a profit of 500,000, right? I mean, because those properties don't sell for the same things as Southern California does. But we happen to live in a place where that's not that unusual. And if you've owned your house for 20 years, there's a good chance you've got $500,000 worth of gain in that property. Now, the funny thing about Section 121 is you can do this every 2 years. So whereas Prop 19, you can do it 3 times in your lifetime, and you've got to be over 55 or disabled or victim of some kind of natural disaster like a wildfire. In this case, in Section 121, if you are the best real estate investor in the world and you buy a house and it goes up $500,000 in 2 years and you sell it, you can sell it and walk away without profit. And you can do that every 2 years for the rest of your life. So not that common for that to happen, but for those of us who bought a house and lived in it for a long time, $500,000 or $250 isn't that unusual as a profit. So there's also another way that we use to avoid taxes on the sale of a house, and that is through what is known in the law as a step up in basis. And the step up in basis can avoid taxes altogether. Now, it's kind of an expensive process to go through because someone has to die. That's what has to happen for there to be a step up in basis. But I have many clients, and I'm sure that you know many people who one of the 2 people in the couple dies before the other. And depending on how they hold title to that property, they could have received, the survivor could have received a total step up in basis. So both halves of the house, the decedent and the survivor, both their halves step up in basis. And that means that the new tax basis for income tax purposes becomes the current fair market value of the property. So in Karen's example, someone paid $400,000 for the house. It's now worth $900,000. And then let's say the husband dies. And when the husband dies, the wife, the survivor, gets a total step up in basis. So now that property has an income tax basis, not a property tax basis, but an income tax basis of $900,000. So if she sold that house that year, there would be absolutely no capital gains whatsoever. And that's kind of nifty. You know, that's a neat thing that the tax law allows for, is the step up in basis. Trying to find that button. Here we go. And this all deals with how you hold title to the property. Many times you'll run across this, but you know, if it's your property or someone else's property, where someone holds the property in joint tenancy, because there was a thing called joint tenancy with right of survivorship that allowed for the spouse to take the whole property if the other spouse died. So it's very common for us to take property as joint tenancy. And then in California and several other states, there's a thing called community property, which allowed for the same thing, but allowed for that step up in basis on both sides. So what we wanted was a combined those two ideas together, and the California legislature about 15 years ago passed a thing called community property with right of survivorship. So it combined the best parts of joint tenancy with the best parts of community property. And that's how we want to hold property now. We want to hold it as community property with the right of survivorship because it avoids probate. It has a double step up in basis. The survivor is required to inherit the property. So, you know, the other spouse can't give away their half. It has to come to the other survivor. And the grantees both sign the deed. So that's how we want to hold property going forward. With that in mind, the big point here is planning. The big point here is always planning. Karen and I have talked about clients who had multiple rental properties, and that whole 2 and 5 thing, where they decide to sell the house they're living in, move into one of their rentals, live in it for 2 years, sell it, take that $500,000 of free profit off the table, move into the next rental property, live in it for 2 years, sell it, take that $500,000 off the table, which is all possible to do. But it requires us to decide in advance that this is what we're going to do. This is a, you know, again, planning is key for everything. So the question is, what's your goal? What's the plan? And then how are we going to execute the plan? You know, so with all that in mind, I want to toss it back to Emily now. And I guess we're up for some Q&A now.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I'm sure you've given everybody plenty to think about, and I'm sure there's some burning questions out there. We're going to start with the questions that have been pre-submitted to Karen. So we'll go ahead and start there, and then we'll move on to the Q&A portion if anybody has any new ones. Just go ahead and make sure that you unmute yourself when it's time to ask the questions, because everyone should be muted still right now. So I'll turn it over to Karen. Karen, I know there were a couple questions that were pretty similar, so I'll have you start with those and then move forward from there.
All righty, Emily, thank you so much. If there's anybody who is not muted, if you could make sure to mute, that way we can have really clear, when we have so many people on the call, it can have echo. I think, Emily, is there a possibility you might be able to mute? I think, Eugenia, you might still be unmuted.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I'm mute. Well, I don't know.
There you go.
There we go. All righty, that's great. And then absolutely, we'll go ahead. I had people submit some of their questions ahead of time. And so we're going to go ahead and cover those first, and then we'll open it up for Q&A for additional questions that may have come up after you've had the content. So this question comes from John and Leanne. And John and Leanne purchased their home about 20 years ago from Leanne's mom and dad. And Leanne's mom and dad purchased the home like in the early 1970s. So the question is, so we pay, obviously because of that, they pay very little property taxes. When they bought the home from the mom and dad, they got mom and dad's old taxes, and now they've really got old taxes. And they've been tempted several times to and feel like they'd like to move, but they feel like it would be foolish to give up their tax base. Under these circumstances, can we move to another home and take this tax base with us? And the answer is a resounding yes. So for all of those years that you've kind of decided to hang on to your tax base, this is your time to be able to get some freedom to do whatever it is that you would like to do. So with the advent of Proposition 19, as long as, although I'm trying to think, I'm not quite sure how old you guys are, but if you are 55 or older, then you can go ahead and take your old tax base with you anywhere up and down the state of California. So hopefully that answers that question for John and Leanne. And then Georgie, you asked kind of a two-part question here. How does inheritance affect property tax calculations under Proposition 19? And do you still have protection under Proposition 19 for non-residential properties? Actually, we didn't get into the details on this, but I think I'm going to punt that question back over to Chris. And then Chris, maybe you can take, after Georgie's questions, you can go ahead and take the rest that were already submitted that were more tax advice questions.
Got it. Thank you. Georgia, good question. We're talking about two different kinds of taxes here, and this is where things get confusing. We're talking about property taxes, which, as Karen described, are 1% of the fair market value at the time of transfer. Okay, so when you bought the house and it transferred to you, your taxes are 1% plus whatever little county taxes go on top of that. And we're talking about income taxes. So in those two realms, first to know is that Prop 19 does not deal with non-residential property. It only deals with residential property. So that's a change to the law. It used to be that any parent to child or grandparent to grandchild transfer of property was covered by this. You could take the tax basis, the real estate tax basis with you in transfer. No longer. Now, when a parent passes a property to a child, unless the child moves into the property, and I'm talking at death, the transfer at death is when they transfer the property to the child must move into the property and live in it as their primary residence in order to retain the old tax basis. Otherwise, it is a step up to fair market value for a real estate tax basis. The same would be true in income tax basis. That whole step up in basis only occurs when someone dies. So let me make sure we got the question. How does inheritance affect property tax calculations under Prop 19? If it's a residential property and it passes from child or grandparent, or from parent or grandparent to child or grandchild, then you can transfer that basis as long as the heir moves into the property and lives in as their primary residence. But you can't do it for rental property. You can't do it for vacation property. You can only do it for residential. This is my primary house kind of property.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, then number two, how do capital gains taxes in Prop 19 work when selling a California property and buying your next property out of state? Well, Prop 19 doesn't apply at all.
True. Yes. Now I
Okay.
understand.
So yeah, 58 counties only in California. So if you want to move to Henderson, sorry, you don't get to take that property tax basis with you. But as far as the capital gains taxes work, as long as this is a primary residence, those are federal laws. That Section 121 exclusion that California conforms with is a federal tax law. So when you sell your house, you still get that 250 or that 500, regardless of if it's an Anchorage or Boise or where I'm from, Ann Arbor, Michigan. No matter where that house is, you still get that 250 or 500. Or if you died and passed that property to a child, it gets that step up in basis. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Good. Okay, awesome. Then Roseanne asks a good one here. My question, if a home is in a trust or a revocable living trust, and by a show of hands, how many of us have one of those? Good. Okay, the rest of you go out and get one of those. Okay, you want to have that, and Karen will tell you more about it later. But you want to have that for exactly this reason. What happens if sold upon my death? What's the time limit in a property sale? And are each of my beneficiaries taxed separately or on the total capital gains? If the house is fully paid for, advantages, disadvantages to selling or a beneficiary living or using as an income property. Used to be in the old days, prior to November, people would routinely or will their house to their children, either through their trust or otherwise, and then the kids would take the house and turn it into a rental property. And they would retain that tax basis because it went parent to child. So the property tax basis was good. They'd get the step up in income tax basis because of a death and a transfer at death. So all of that was beautiful. Now, again, unless one of the kids, and if there are 4 heirs to the estate, and one of them decides to live in the house, they get to take the property tax basis with them, okay, because they're living in the house, even though the other 3 didn't. And the property itself gets a step up in basis either way. Now, the tricky part about this, and the tricky part about having a trust, and we all kind of raised our hands when we said that, is that your trust needs to make provision for that community property with rights of survivorship. So it has to have some kind of wording in the trust, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to leave that to the attorneys, but your trust needs to conform to those rules to allow it to have a step up on both sides if one dies or any of that other kind of stuff. So check your trust to make sure that it's compliant with the current law. But the bottom line to it is Prop 19 will hold the real estate tax basis on the property if one of the heirs moves into the property and lives in it, and the capital gains part of it goes away because everything gets a step up in basis at death. So all of that will work. And I think that covered all of selling to a beneficiary living or selling using it. Right. So they'll want to move into it if they want to retain the property tax basis. Either way, it gets a step up in income tax basis. And it's funny, we were talking about that difference, Karen. It was what, $8,000 between buying the $1.2 million house or the other. So a lot of times we get caught up in making sure that we're saving a little bit of money. But in that, if we transferred the property to a child while we were still alive, they take our income tax basis with them, even though they get our property tax basis. So watch how that one works. In the example I used, the single person who sold the $800,000 house, they ended up with $85,000 in capital gains taxes at sale. So if a parent transferred a property to a child, the child takes the income tax basis of the parent because it didn't pass at death, it passed before death. And they do get that lower property tax basis, but then when they go to sell the house, they're going to pay $85,000 in income taxes on the sale. So we want to think about this, and again, we want to plan for this, because that property tax savings, you'd have to have the property, the child would have to keep the property for what, 12 years to overcome that tax difference. And in that 12 years, that property probably appreciated some more anyway. So we don't necessarily want to transfer property to children or to grandchildren before our death because they don't get the income tax step up. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Chris, there's a piggyback question, and Kelly, Miller, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself. Kelly asked in the chat, how long does the child has to live in the home that they inherited? And I think your answer probably is going to be as long as they want the low property taxes and then they can sell. But would you answer that a little bit more? And Kelly, feel free to unmute if you have an additional piggyback question before Chris moves on.
I've unmuted. I just wanted to know how long do they have to live there to take advantage of that. So
Well, and that's kind of a funny question because there's no hard and fast rule on that. And the IRS is great about this. They write laws and they put stuff on the books, and then they wait for someone to have a problem so they can get challenged in court and they can find out what the answer really is. What we've kind of evolved to is the same rules, Karen, is the 131 exchanges. So when someone 131s into, and you have a great
1031.
sorry,
exchange, right.
1031 exchange. Yeah, so you have a great story about this that I'm going to ask you to tell in a second, so get ready. But if somebody 1031 exchanges and avoids all the income taxes of the original sale and they 1031 into a new property, typically it's a 2-year window of living in it, or excuse me, of maintaining that same tax characteristic for the 1031 to stick. Now, when I say 2 years, I don't really mean 24 months. Okay, what I mean are 2 tax returns. Okay, so if we 1031 in November of 19, and then we filed 19's tax return showing the 1031, and then we filed 20's tax return, that property is still in the 1031, still a rental, so we went rental to rental. And then in 21, okay, we've already filed 2 tax returns with that property now in the 1031 exchange. In 2021, the property now becomes my personal residence. It's no longer a rental. I still maintain my integrity of the 1031. So Karen, what's your great story on this?
Is that the person that lived in the house in San Clemente for $1.2 million?
Yes.
Okay,
It's
so
a beauty.
I live in my house in San Clemente. I look at the ocean. It's $1.2 million. I take me and my husband. We take our $500,000 one-time, capital gains. Now we sell our house in San Clemente. We don't have to pay any capital gains tax. And we move into our little 1-bedroom rental because we just want to live there. And we love our little 1-bedroom studio rental. They live there for 1.5 years as their principal place of residence, and then clear the equity out of that without paying capital gains. Although you have to
Well, you had another
be a
client
little inconvenient.
you had one client who transferred 1031 2 rental properties into a beautiful place on the coast.
Oh, forgot
Yeah,
that story. Yes, of
that's a
course. See, we see
beauty.
it all in
This
our
is,
business.
yeah,
Yes, I
yeah.
have friends of mine that owned. They lived in Coto de Casa. They sold their 2 rental properties in Utah. They transferred their 2 rental properties in Utah with a 1031 tax deferred exchange. Bought a nice couple $1 million home in Dana Point overlooking the ocean. Turned that into a rental for the 2 years. They're Mormons, and they went on a full 1-year missions trip with their church. Came back, lived in their little house in Coto de Casa for the 2nd year. Sold the house in Coto, and then moved into their place in Dana Point. So basically what they did is they wanted to move from Coto to Dana Point, but they used the tax advantage of selling their 2 rentals to do it. Did I explain that well?
It was beautiful. And again, there are massive paydays, tax paydays for us if we'll plan how we're going to do these things. Okay. You can't do them on a whim. You can't do them, you can't think of a Tuesday and do it on Thursday. You've got to plan through it. But that's a great example of that 2-year window. So I think that's really the magic, of any of this stuff, is to maintain its tax integrity. Things have to file 2 tax returns in the new characteristic of whatever it is before you move on. And in that example, it was 2 years, and the other example was about 1.5 years. But there were 2 tax returns filed in that time period. So there's that one. John Chiano asked us a good one. Do you have any information on President Biden's stepped up basis plan? This is going to be kind of a funny answer, because obviously not. We know when now President Biden was candidate Biden, he had here's what I'm going to do with taxes if I become president. And one of those things was to eliminate this step up in basis. Now, the step up in basis thing is for all assets, not just real estate. Okay. And that's a little different than in the 2017 tax bill that became law in 2018, where 1031 exchanges became only real estate. So 1031 exchanges used to involve other things, then it became just real estate and that tax law. So right now, the only 1031 exchange you've got available to you is a real estate 1031 exchange. But step up in basis applies to everything. Could be a company or family owned business, could be a stock and bond portfolio, could be all kinds of things. And all of those things at the death of the owner get a step up in basis. Well, in the Biden tax plan, which is just a theory on I'm trying to find a piece of paper, a theory on a piece of paper. It's not real. It's not even a law on the floor of any governing body to think about. But in that plan, the idea was to eliminate this step up in basis so that no one got a get out of jail free card. No one got all that tax forgiven. They would have to pay tax on the old basis if they inherited that property. Now, like I said, not passed, not a law, but it's an idea. So thanks, John, for the question. Then my next question here is from Deborah, and she's asking, are capital gains per person or on the title or just on the house sale itself? This I think dealt with, as we looked at it, if multiple people owned a property. Was that what we thought?
No.
Well, I'm sorry. Remind me.
Oh, I think we were talking about the little bit more complicated question later. But I think, Debbie, I think your question is that you currently own your home, you and your husband own your home together. And how does the 250 and the 500 work? 250 single, 500 married. And do you need all the receipts for your home improvements
Right.
to
All
bring
that kind of stuff
to
comes
bring
in.
that basis
Okay.
down? What's the tax percentage on capital gains? How much is the capital gains percent?
Right.
And
right.
if you buy another house with a comparable sales price, is there any capital gains? So
Right.
I'll let you just kind of answer that question and repeat some of the things that you indicated earlier.
Well, so the 250 or 500 is only relative to, in fact, no, I'm going to take that back. If two single people owned a house together, they could both have 250 of free gain. And if they were married, that would be $500,000 of free gain. So if two people owned a property together and one of them sold their property to the other or to someone else, they could have 250 of their half. If they're married together, they get the 500 on the whole thing. Do you need your receipts for any home improvements? And this is one of those technical, practical, questions. So technically, yes. Technically, absolutely. Practically, no. No one really ever asks for the copy of the receipt from Home Depot for that $3 light switch that you changed. What you want to do, though, is you want to have a box in your records. And in that box, you want to, every time at the end of every year, when you close out the year and put all your stuff away and store your records, you want to have in that box every capital improvement you made to the house. If you don't have that, have a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, list every time you make a major capital improvement to the house. You may need to go back depending on how long you've lived in the house. When we did this seminar a couple of years ago, I just had a client sell a house they'd owned for 43 years. He was a school teacher in Huntington Beach. He sold his house. His wife was a stay-at-home. They had 3 kids. They raised them. They all moved on. And they sold this house and they had a huge potential profit in it. But when we went back and we added up every time they re-roofed and the 2 times they put in new driveways because the driveway kept cracking, and every time they resodded, and every time they painted, and every time they put new flooring in it, every time, all of a sudden that profit on that sale went way down because of all the things they'd done to the house. And they went back in pictures. They found pictures of when Donnie was 3 and what the floor looked like, and then when Donnie was 8 and what the floor looked like, and then when Donnie was 15 and what the floor looked. And it was those pictures that helped us reconstruct all that stuff. That's called a contemporaneously kept record, or a recreated contemporaneously kept record, and that stands up in IRS challenge. Now, I'll tell you, in 39 years and 20,000 tax returns, I've never had the sale of a house audited. They just don't do it. The IRS just understands that that's the way this works. And so technically, absolutely keep every receipt. And if you talk to my wife, she keeps every receipt for everything. Okay. She's married to an accountant. She understands how we keep receipts. However, in dealing with regular people, nah, we really don't keep all those receipts. So, as long as we keep a list and a log of everything we're doing to the house and we keep a relative idea what it costs, we should be okay. Next, what's the percentage of capital gains? 15% federally, about 10% on the state. The state does not have a preferential rate for long-term capital gains, just the feds. Now, that said, the answer is really it depends, because depending on your income, you could have a 5% surcharge on additional capital gains tax if your income is high enough. You could pay the net investment tax surcharge, which is another 3.8%. So what's the highest rate you could pay in capital gains? 23.8% federally and about 10% with the state of California. But most of us are paying at a rate of about 15% on the Fed side and about 10% on the state side.
Can I ask, Chris, when
yeah.
does that 3.8 kick in? What is the adjusted gross income for that?
There is no direct answer to that question, Karen, only because it depends on how that capital gain was created. If somebody sells a business, that's not a net investment tax surchargeable thing. If the Supreme Court decides to repeal the ACA, that all goes away anyway.
Okay.
So there are so many other factors to that one that it's really hard to judge. But on a relative sense, about 450 in taxable income is where most of the nasty starts to happen. So you start losing write-offs, you start getting surcharges, you start getting slapped on the hand at about 450. Somehow that's a magical number in tax law. I don't know why. But yeah, depends. And then the last question here was, if you buy another house with a comparable price, are there capital gains? Yeah, that was the old law. That was the pre-87 stuff. We could buy another house, move the gains into that house, and then just have a really low tax basis on that property. That all went away. So that's no longer an option for us.
Chris, there looks like there was a question from Lindsay in the chat.
And there was also a question, from Kim, and another question as well.
Sam.
Do you see those? Question about joint tenancy. This is probably a Chris question.
Go ahead.
So let me go ahead and read it, and maybe this is from Kim Thornton. Let's see. Question regarding joint tenancy. Upon the death and the surviving partner inherits the property, how long does the step-up basis apply? Years?
Well, in a joint tenancy situation, only the half of the joint tenant gets stepped up. So the survivor's half does not get stepped up. But the step up, once it occurs, is good forever. So once that step up happens, doesn't matter how long. It's a forever thing. So did that answer that, Karen?
So
Did I
I'm
get that
really
right?
hearing from you that joint tenancy is no longer the way to go.
No.
If people are married, listen
Right.
up, everybody, because I think I had to have that said to me. Now, I mean, we're in a trust, but husband and wife community property right of survivorship seems to be the natural way to go unless you move into a trust.
Right.
So Kim, thank you for making us look at that question a third time and repeating it, because the answer is worth it.
I do kind of have a follow-up. So
Yeah.
Okay. So I bought this property with my aunt back in 1985. She died in 87. So Karen and I have been working on this whole process of trying to figure out what my actual my buying price at the time was. So I would, sorry, my dog's barking. I gotta pick him. So I would inherit, so my half, I would not get stepped up, but her half, I will.
In her half, you got stepped up in 1987 when she died.
Okay.
And that's the tricky part. So we've got to go back in research and find what the property was worth in 87. Her half gets a step up. Okay. And then from 87 to now, that's all capital gain again.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Well, it was only a 2-year difference. It's not going to make a lot of difference.
Not going to be that different. You're right.
Okay.
Right.
Very good though. Thank you.
Okay.
Terrific.
Looks
Chris,
like
do you
Bonnie-
want to go on to Ken Johnson's question next?
I don't
And
know.
then Lindsay,
Bonnie-
we'll catch you
Bonnie's-
on a double question.
Can I just kind
yeah.
of, piggyback on that? In my situation, November of 19, my mother passed away.
Okay.
Her house was appraised at that time. We sold it last summer for 75,000 more. So is that a capital gains? Do we get from the appraisal on the date of her death?
Technically, yes, but because the sales costs are going to reduce that. And anything you've done to the property since you inherited it also reduces that gain.
So it's still down. Yeah, I think all that's like 40. So we still have.
So you got about 35,000, right?
So
in capital
none
gain.
of the section 121 or anything applies then, right?
Because you didn't live in it, right? As your primary residence, right? Then no.
She did,
Right.
but
Yep.
it was in a trust.
Right.
So there's no way to get around that. then.
No, you've got a $35,000 gain, it sounds like. Yeah.
I mean, you really can't complain about gains, but if you get a
Well,
bonus-
and I think that's the real thing to look at there. You know, and I've got a client who's inheriting a $2.1 million house, and they're really angry over the fact that the property taxes are going to go up because they want to turn it into a Airbnb kind of property. And I keep going, I don't know, it's $2 million. I mean, and it's free and clear. Should you be upset? No, you should be happy. You know, so yeah, glass half full, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. You've been really helpful.
Good. Okay.
Bonnie, that was a great question. Chris, if I
Yeah.
can just interject here for a moment for everybody before we move on to the rest of the questions. I get asked probably, I'm thinking once every 2 or 3 months, for if somebody inherits a property to do a broker price opinion on what that home is worth. And
Right.
the reason being is that if one spouse passes away and the other spouse gets the stepped up basis, we need to make some sort of evidence as to what that new stepped up amount is. So I've been told anyway by most attorneys that it can either be done by a qualified appraiser that charges $500, or a real estate broker on their stationery who does it for free because they're nice people. And I'm more than happy to, I provide that for people. So once you inherit a property, or Bonnie, in your case, if your mom's house had passed, your mom had passed away and you guys needed the stepped up basis, that is something that I do provide. And that's something that's very important. And an appraisal can be subjective. So I always try to err a little bit on the higher side, so that my clients don't end up, if they do end up by selling the house immediately or within the first year, they don't see any capital gains. So thank you for bringing that up. And that probably many of you may not know that that's a service that I provide, but it is. People ask me and I do it. So there you go.
And that's really important to differentiate too, because what we're talking about there is papering a transaction, and you could spend $500 to do it, but you don't need to. As long as you get a qualified realtor to give you a value opinion on their letterhead, the IRS will accept that. Right. And I would always do that. No matter how a property comes to you, you always want to do that. You want to do that as close to the date of death as you can, because that really puts a line in the sand of what the value of that property is. So thanks, Karen. Good point.
Absolutely.
Why
don't we move on to Ken Johnson's question?
Yep.
And then Lindsay's got a question, and she's also got a piggyback question. So Lindsay will handle both at the same time, but let's do Ken's question first.
Can a capital gains waiver be used more than once in your lifetime? That Section 121 exclusion can be used every 2 years on your principal residence. Doesn't count for rental property, doesn't count for a vacation home. It has to be principal residence, but yes, you can use it every 2 years for the rest of your life. And that's
that.
Yeah.
When you went through the presentation, the Section 121, is that for federal only, or does that apply to state also?
State of California conforms to that law. And most things in tax, that's the way the state of California goes. The feds pass it, the state thinks about it for a while, and then they say, oh, okay, we're going to do that too. So in that case, yes, the 121 applies to California as well as federal. Yeah. That good?
All right.
Great, thank you.
Good.
Perfect.
Okay, no problem.
Chris, you have Lindsay's question, and then Lindsay also asked your opinion on the new administration. Do you expect that taxes are going to go up? So I'll let you speak to that as well.
That's a good one. So I believe there's something in Prop 19 in relation to not only a negative impact for inheritance purposes, but also gives something along the lines of a spouse were to die, it also having a negative impact financially on the living spouse. In Prop 19, the only negative on an inheritance is on that rental property thing. And that's only on the property tax assessed value of the property. You can't carry a rental property from parent to child or in an inherited sense, but it will get the step up on the income tax basis. And there's nothing in Prop 19 that I've seen that is negative toward a surviving spouse. Karen, have you seen anything?
I haven't. No.
Okay.
I think that's, yeah. I think
Okay.
so far we're protected.
And guys, our greatest revenge is to live longer. Okay, so let's do what we can to push her down the stairs as opposed to having her push us down the stairs. Okay, so just a little sideline there. So then, yeah, I mean, that cover both Lindsay's questions. We're good
Well,
there.
let's see. Lindsay's second question is, what do you think about the new administration and
Oh,
taxes? Lindsay, is that your question? Lindsay, do you
yes.
want to
Okay.
unmute for a sec? Is that your
Lindsay's
question?
nodding. Yes. Yes.
Okay, good.
She was nodding. Yes. So here's the thing, and we've been talking about this for probably 5 or 6 years in our industry. Since I got into the industry back in what year was that, Karen? 1982.
1982.
Yeah, that was if everyone needs a little refresher, that was when was it TEFRA? There was a tax act passed during the Reagan administration, which started to drive down tax rates. Now, it also removed some deductions, but it drove down tax rates. Tax rates have systematically been driven down since 1982. Now, we know when something is pushed down, what's the natural reaction to that thing eventually? Say it all together. It has to go up. Yeah, it has to go up. Okay. So in my career, taxes have been going lower and lower and lower and lower. And in 2000, President Bush Jr. passed a tax bill that's pretty well been maintained since then, but it had the lowest tax rates ever. In 2017, we managed to chip a little bit off of that, and tax rates went even lower. We've been, since about 10 years ago, been spending like drunken sailors. So eventually what has to happen is tax rates have to go up. And I'm sorry for everyone who's under the age, Emily, under the age of, Emily's 12, so I don't know if this really applies to her. But all the young people, you're paying the lowest taxes you will ever pay in your life right now. Enjoy it. All of us who are about to retire or are retired, it won't matter. Taxes are going to go up, but it won't apply to us because our incomes are down. So we're good. Okay. But we're going to see a systematic, I think probably over the next 30 or 40 years, a gradual increase in taxes, and taxes are only going up. They are not going down. So, and I don't think I'm the only one saying that. I think that's pretty well accepted. Yeah, I see the Johnsons nodding. Yes. So I mean, I think that's pretty well what's going to happen. So sorry.
Oh, that's perfect. That is the way it is. It looks like we have 2 other questions that were posted in the chat, and they're generic enough that I think they'll help everybody along the way. So if we could go ahead and answer those 2. I'm going to drop down to the easy one here first, but Kelly Miller asked, does a refinance have any impact on capital gains?
None.
I think your answer is no, so that's a quick no.
Yep.
And also, Kelly, thank you very much for liking my jacket. I appreciate it. I like my jacket too.
Very nice. Very nice. All right, cool.
I tried to color coordinate with my 2 brown things behind me. And then is it you're new to, is it Leonie?
It's Lonnie.
Lonnie, thank you.
Yeah.
Easy enough. Lonnie, what is your question of Chris?
So My question is involving two properties that were both purchased in the 70s. One property my father inherited from my grandmother, that just got transferred to me before Prop 19 went into effect.
Okay.
And then the second property would be my father's residence. So my question would be, if I'm understanding what you previously said, when my father passes and I inherit his residence, if I move into that house, I can retain the low property taxes as well and make the house that I'm in now that already has the low property taxes because it was pre-19, I can still retain those low property taxes.
Yep.
Also?
Yep.
Okay.
And the income tax basis of the property you're in now goes back to when your grandmother died.
Right.
Okay. And your dad's house, that income tax basis will get the step up to its fair market value at the time of his death.
Okay.
So you'll have a property tax basis way down here, but an income tax basis way up here, which is, as far as I can tell, the best of both
good,
worlds.
right?
Oh yeah, that's the best of both
Okay.
worlds right there. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, cool.
Perfect. Thank you.
My
These
pleasure.
have been absolutely really, the questions have been so great because I think they have all pertained to all of us.
They're smart, Karen. These are smart questions. These are
They
smart
are,
people.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I have two more, a little bit more technical and questions that are more particular to my two clients. So I'm going to ask Bonnie and Ramsey, and I'm going to ask Julie and David to kind of stay on the call afterwards. And Chris and I will go ahead and try and answer your more, little bit more personal questions that will work for you. Are there any other, before I wrap things up, because I really want to honor the fact that this was supposed to be a power hour. It's now a power hour and 4 minutes. Are there any other questions that you want to pose in a chat or raise your hand, as long as Chris and I are here, that we can answer before we wrap it up?
Karen, it's Trish.
Hey, Trish.
I have one, but it's probably kind of personal too. Can I stay on?
Yeah, you want to stay on afterwards?
Yeah, and ask Chris, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we're gonna just have a stay on-a-thon afterwards, so no problem. So stay on afterwards. Anybody else? More general question? Paul, thank you for putting this together. And Paul, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Okay, before we end, I had promised you guys that if you post your questions ahead of time, because we wanted to be as prepared as possible, that I was doing a gift certificate drawing for a $100 gift certificate to the Container Store. Woo. So in honor of doing the truth here, I've got the names of the people that turned in their questions ahead of time. And the winner of the gift certificate is Georgie Denman.
Woohoo!
Woohoo!
Awesome.
I'll pop this in the mail to you.
I finally found something, Karen.
Hey.
So it's a good night, little 9-year-old.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
All righty. I'm going to go ahead. I want to thank everybody for being on this call. Any other questions that come up that are anything related to real estate, please feel free to call me at any time. Chris, we are entering into tax season. If you don't want to prepare your own taxes and you need some professional help, please reach out to me and I'll make sure to get you Chris's information, because he's absolutely awesome and the best. So I want to make sure that you have opportunity for that. Can you post, Chris, your contact information on the chat?
How would I do that?
Emily, why don't you, Emily, can you post that contact information for Chris
I think
on the chat?
you are stretching my technical abilities right now. Is what you're doing.
I got your back, yes. Chris. I got your back.
Thank you, Emily.
All righty.
How about just saying your phone number and contact information?
There we go. We could do that.
Not
Emily,
technical, not technical.
That's not too technical. Okay.
Not at all.
Phone number. I'm going to give you my direct office line is 949. You got to find it here. 899-8073. And
I'm also posting it in the chat, just
so
fantastic. You guys have a backup.
Great. And my email address is Chris, CHRIS, at YMMINC.com.
I asked a question before saying, do you do second opinion on taxes?
Second opinion on tax. I mean, you bothered someone enough to have them prepare it. Now you want someone else to say whether or not they were good.
Yes, because I'm not really overwhelmed by my tax return.
I would be happy to give you a half hour to discuss your taxes. Yes.
Cool.
Okay.
Awesome.
All
And I
right.
have your phone number now. Thank you.
There it is. Fair enough.
All
right.
Perfect. Well, I just want to thank everybody for being on this Zoom call. I think it was a good power hour. I'm tickled. Any of you can go ahead and pop off the call at any time. I want to make sure Trish and Jack, Ramsey and Bonnie and Dave and Julie stay on with Chris and me and Emily till we answer all of your questions. And if anybody else wants to stay on and has a question
Thanks,
that they haven't gotten covered, please let me know. And I'm available to you at any time. So have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, Karen, you ready to get into it here?
Yeah, why don't we go with Bonnie and Ramsey? Let's go with your question first.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing this. As I mentioned, my mother passed away. And I'm thinking from what you've said now, this is answering the main part of it. Our main question was if we get a second home, a vacation home, does that apply under Proposition 19? And from what I understood, it doesn't.
Oh, sorry.
But if there's multiple owners, and so now it's a vacation home, half of the home will have gone up because it was under my mother and she passed away before 19. The other half is with my uncle and he hasn't passed away yet.
Okay.
That's so does that say when he passes away, do we still keep half tax basis under 19? Does it make sense? Because we've got.
Well, but it's none of the people who currently own it as their primary residence, right? It's a vacation home for them. Okay. So unless one of the people who inherits it moves into it as their primary residence, then no. Prop 19 goes away.
But she passed away before 19, so I have it now. I have half.
Okay, so you have your half. Okay.
I got her tax basis.
And so you got her property tax base. You also got to step up in her income tax base at her death. If your uncle dies, okay, whoever inherits his part of it, if they move into it as their primary residence, they could maintain the property tax base. Okay, the low property tax base, but they'd have to turn it into their primary residence, which means it's no longer a vacation home for you.
Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, does that make sense?
I think, yeah, that answers it. But all our other ones, do you want to just ask them because they're the, we'll just check, but yeah. It makes it tough on the vacation homes now.
It does. It does. Yeah, absolutely. Right.
So where is your vacation home before you go off the line?
It's in Balboa and it was purchased in 1920. And we have the 1920.
Can I rent it next weekend?
Yeah, can we Airbnb it?
But you have to realize it's it's $100-year-old home. But it's the home is worth zero. It's the
land.
Yeah, yeah.
And but to have it, that's why we've been able to keep it all these years.
Yeah, yeah.
You have a tax basis of 1920.
5 generations.
Well, and a lot of people with that kind of, when they have a place like that, they tear it down. If they're going to do a tear down and a rebuild, they tear down around the garage. And then that way it becomes a quote unquote remodel rather than a new build. And that helps your property taxes too.
So we're just trying to explore every way we can because when my uncle passes, taxes are going to be make it unkeepable.
Right, right.
Absolutely.
But
is it historic?
So helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is it an historic property of some kind? Can we get an historic exclusion for the property tax?
Quite possibly. I don't know what the.
I don't know what.
Google that one. Google that one.
I think that would be National Historic Society. Maybe
Yeah,
start there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I had a client buy a
It's
house.
Original home on the peninsula. It's an original home.
Then it probably could. Yeah, that's a great idea. Good suggestion, you.
We like that, Trish.
That was awesome. Nice job. I was thinking, Trish. Way to go.
If that happens,
use
you
that
let me know.
noggin. Yeah.
I would say nice dinner out for Trish, and you can send the gift certificate to me. I'll forward it on.
Awesome. Awesome. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll
cool.
look into that. Thank you. You know, like you said, planning ahead.
Yes. Always.
For a long
Always.
time.
Yeah.
But,
Yep. All right. Well, good luck with that. That
Great.
sounds like a fun project either way, regardless of where it goes. Yeah, that's cool.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Our next question is from David and Julie Blake, and it's a tax deferral question on rental properties. So
Right.
could you speak with, I think your question is about a 458 or a 453.
453.
Right. That's a tax deferral strategy that my brother was telling me about, who is an accountant, and he's doing the technical part of it. And I just kind of, I understood part of it, but I wondered if Chris could kind of explain a little bit more. I think it's a 453 or 458 tax strategy.
Yeah.
Have you heard about that, Chris?
So it was funny because when I first saw that, it didn't click. But then when I looked up 453, it all clicked. There's been a thing in the tax law for the longest time, and it deals with installment sales. Okay, an installment sale is, and this was much more prevalent back in the 70s and the 80s, where we did AITDs and wraparound notes on houses. And I would sell you my house, and I would carry back a big note, and I would only pay taxes on the note part, on the profit on the note part, as I received the money. That became its whole own thing. And it turned into Section 453, which is all about installment sales. So the idea is, I've got this thing that's worth $1 million. I sell it, and I'm only going to get 50,000 of the principal a year, and I'm only going to pay tax on that principal as I get the money. Now, a bunch of smart attorneys, and that's almost an oxymoron, because I think attorneys are more crooked than smart most of the time. No offense to any attorneys on the call. But what they figured out was, if you set up a thing in a trust, which is a very sketchy, trusts are really scary to the IRS. They hate trusts because trusts have so many weird provisions to them and weird rules. What they did was they set up this thing called a deferred sales trust, a DST. And that's probably what your brother is referring to. So you sell this stuff, okay, but you actually transfer it into this deferred sales trust, and then the trust sells it, okay? And the money comes into the trust. Now the money sits in the trust, and I have a deal with the trust to take money out of the trust. It's got to be on either a 10 or a 20-year basis. So I've got to set it up to be a 10-year withdrawal or a 20-year withdrawal. And as I take money out of the trust on this schedule that's in the trust, and that's where the IRS starts to get really scared. Oh God, oh no. And so they back off all this stuff. But as I take the money out of the trust, I start paying income tax on the money I'm receiving. Okay. And the great thing about how you can set up these trusts, because the attorneys have been really scary about this, is I could defer any payments out of the trust for 5 years. I could say, okay, I'm going to sell this collection of assets, transfer them into the trust first, trust sells them, money comes into the trust, it sits in the trust, and it gets invested in Bitcoin or Amazon or Apple, and it sits there and it just grows. And then as I pull money out of the trust, I pay tax on that money based on my original sale. So it has a lot of really very metered, very specific kinds of provisions to it. You do need a third-party company, because that becomes the owner, the DST, the actual deferred sales trust. it's a very complex tax strategy. It can be genius if it's executed right. You know, so I would advise you to look into it. Look at the cost of creating the trust, maintaining the trust, because they're not doing it for free. They're going to make money on that every year. But the ability to defer it for a period of time and then only pay it as you take it is really advantageous. You know, so if you don't need the income for 10 years and you can let it sit in there for 10 years and then start to draw it out over 20 years, wow, you know, what a benefit. But again, you know, is that a better benefit than hold the property until you die, your heirs get it at a stepped up basis? I don't know. I mean, with tax rates going up, do I want to take the money now at the lowest tax rates I'm ever going to see in my life? Or do I want to take the money in 20 years at much higher tax rates? You know, so there's all kinds of, you know, that's what I love about this business. And that's, you can see how nerdy excited I get about this, because there's so many variables and options and things to think about as you approach this. I'll end with this little story. My favorite episode of Mad Men, Don Draper sells a house in San Pedro. Anyone a Mad Men fan? No? Okay. So he sells this house in San Pedro. His accountant comes to visit him in the office. And his accountant explains to him, well, we sold the house for $24,000. It was right on the beach in San Pedro, okay? But he only paid $10,000 for it when he bought it, so he'd have $14,000 profit. And his accountant explains to him, and all we had to pay in capital gains taxes on that $14,000 was 61%. So you end up with $1.50, you know, and they're all excited about this sale. Tax rates used to be tremendously high. And we have gotten used to, just like interest rates. And Karen, I don't know, my first mortgage was at 11%. Okay, that's how old I am. And now if somebody's looking at a rate higher than 3%, they lose it. You know, oh my God, 3%, I couldn't possibly pay that on a house. No, the first CD I ever bought was at 15%. Oh my Lord, we used to make money at the bank. You know, you can't make money at the bank anymore. But it's because all these rates have been dropped down and we've gotten so used to them being so low. The bottom line to it is, even if you paid that surcharge and the NIT and you paid 23% on the 23.8 on the Fed and 10 on the state, is that going to be a lower rate than eventually the taxes we're going to see? I don't want to live to see that. Okay, I'm planning on dying before rates get super high again. But Emily will see those higher rates.
I'm in trouble.
Yeah, you are screwed. Okay, because all that's going to happen is rates are going to go up. So you know, lots of variables to think about. But DSTs are very creative in a very untested by the IRS tax strategy at this time, just because they've been so creatively assembled. You know.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chris.
Yeah, my
Appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Yeah, thanks for the question. That was a great question.
Oh, that is awesome. And I think our last question is from Trish and Jack.
Yeah, so hopefully I could be real quick. It's kind of specific. So my parents have the home they live in and a couple of rental properties. Okay. And one of the rental properties is a home that my brother and I will inherit, okay? And my brother would eventually like to move into it. Now, obviously, when we inherit it, we're not going to get that tax basis, right? We'll get the stepped up, but we will not get the nice low tax base because they bought this house like 40 years ago or something.
Right.
So, but he would like to move into it. If he sold his house that he's in now, which has a fairly low tax base because he bought it 25 years ago, how can he get into that house that he already owns half of and keep that tax basis? How can he do that? Will that work?
Oh yeah, because right, Karen, because he's going to sell his house and then he's going to use Prop 19 to buy into this other house.
May I ask how old your brother is?
He's over 55.
Okay, there you go.
Thank goodness.
So yes, so he can take his tax base would be the same as his tax base on the home that he's in now.
Okay, even though he already owns half of it.
Right, because
Okay,
he's
Chris,
gonna
I'll let
buy
you take
the
it from there.
well, because he's gonna buy the other half from you, right?
Right.
Aha. So what that's called is the creative way we orchestrate this sale, okay, and how we make this sale really look. I'm gonna imagine that your parents have more than just this house, and you guys are gonna inherit more than just this house. So what I would suggest is you inherit all of that house. He takes an equal part of the estate to that half of the house, and then he buys you out of that house altogether. Okay, so it's moving chips around on the board, but it's all the same chips and it's all the same money. And all we're going to do is give you the basis in that house, which is equal to the step up at their death, so that you're not going to have any income tax gain from that. He's going to be able to maintain that same property tax basis in it because he's going to buy it all from you, and he's going to get the money to do that from another part of the estate. Okay, so you got to, we'll have to put that on a pad and write it all out, but it's all doable. Doable.
Good to know. I may be calling you someday in the distant future.
Hopefully they don't die for a long time and I'm retired by then and you can deal with my son, so.
Okay, all right.
All right. Cool.
Oh.
Well, smart questions, guys. Good thinking. I'd love to see this. And again, this is the funny part about taxes. Taxes are only scary when we don't understand them. The more you understand about them, the more you realize it's not that tough. There's some twists and turns, but like you, Trish, brought up the whole idea about the historic property. Come on, man. This is thinking outside the box. This is a way to get there. And what we like to do is figure out a deductible story and then conform our facts and circumstances to that deductible story. Because that's how you make this work, for your benefit.
Yeah, you answered one of my earlier questions, because one of the things we're thinking of doing is we inherited a property, my husband and I, from his mother a few years ago. But we were already on title for various reasons, so we only get half the stepped up basis on that one.
Yeah.
But I think what we're probably going to do ultimately is move into it for 2 years. And it's at a low tax base.
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
Sell it, get the 500.
Yeah.
Probably buy something cheaper and keep it as a rental property. Eventually, we'll have to move into that, but then eventually we'll turn it back into a rental property.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's a great idea. Okay.
You
cool.
guys are so smart. I get a kick out of you. I get a kick out of all of my clients. Everybody is
anything to keep it away from the government. That's
right.
There it is. That's the key. That's the key.
Get your hands off it. Absolutely.
Hands off my hard-earned money. My family's hard-earned money.
Yeah. Well, Karen, thank you so much for putting this on and for having us all in to your home to have this conversation. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you, Chris and Karen. That was really good.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Emily, it was really helpful.
Oh, this would not have gone as smoothly without Emily.
All right. We need a millennial.
Yeah. Yes.
We all need one.
Thanks a lot.